The planet's puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. And until you've thoroughly tested every last close-trusted view, I find the more you think you know, the less you really do.
That's true, Dr. Zayas. Very well.
Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Yeah, where would we be without THC? The Higher Side Chat Show, Greg Carlwood and Company.
What is going on, Higher Side Chatters? Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke from sunny San Diego. I'm your humble host, Greg Carlwood, and I think we all love to look at popular culture and try to extrapolate the true meaning in these products of the Hollywood propaganda machine, because we've been at this long enough to know there's more happening here than harmless entertainment, but to what degree and to what end? Are we being groomed to subconsciously accept our enslavement and the incoming agendas of the global elite? Are the breadcrumbs that lead to the discovery of a true secret space program and the transhumanist agenda being left peppered throughout sci-fi and spy thriller films? I don't know. They're curious questions, but it does take a truly dedicated mind to separate the wheat from the chaff in this realm of Hollywood breakdowns, and luckily we have just such a guest to help us navigate this vast sea of secrets emanating from the silver screen. His name is Jay Dyer, and he has a Bachelor's of the Arts in Philosophy, as well as being the man behind jaysanalysis.com, where he unpacks the dense details of many of the big films and media we see them churning out. You can see him take the stage at the Secret Space Program Conference in Austin, Texas at the end of the month, and I'm really psyched he's here today. Jay, my man, how the hell are you?
I'm doing rockin' awesome, man.
That's cool. Really excited that you're here. I mean, you do great work. It seems like so many blogs and websites have been cropping up in recent years trying to do these types of breakdowns of symbols and subtext of major films, but you definitely seem to cut to more the core and parse out more meaning than most, I would say.
Thank you.
You know, no problem, man. And I guess to start this thing, where did you start looking at films as more than just entertainment?
Grew up loving movies. Family promoted the arts. My mom was majored in English when she was in college, and she was an editor for a long time. So I just grew up in the realm of books and lit. And then we've all, in America at least, pretty much been saturated with Hollywood. We've grown up with movies. So I grew up with all the classics of 80s science fiction, E.T. and all that, and Star Wars. So then by the time I reached undergrad, I decided that I wanted to do philosophy. And of course, a lot of philosophy courses will get you to ask all kinds of out-of-the-box questions, which I've always enjoyed doing. That's always just kind of been the dude I am. And by the time I got to grad school, you have a lot more freedom with what you can choose to study and research. So I had the option of choosing grad work in English and philosophy, which allowed me to integrate film as well as geopolitics, because I'd done my undergraduate is also in history. So I was able to take a lot of historical research and just tie it all in together. And that's always what I've been interested in doing with these subjects, is approaching them as a integrative thinker rather than some sort of boring specialist who just stares at earthworms all day, like those in scientism in that realm. So what I like to do is, I like the idea of a Renaissance man. I don't necessarily think that I am one, but, we've lost that idea from the Middle Ages of late Middle Ages of that kind of guy or person or thinker or artist or whatever who can integrate multiple areas of thought, art, history, etc. So that's what I did. I said, all right, well, what's something interesting I can write about? And concurrent with this, I had the website going for most of undergrad and grad years. I had an old blog that I got rid of, started a new one about 5 years ago. And that's what you currently see in its present incarnation as jaysanalysis.com. And started with the movie stuff. And I started doing it before other certain sites out there that do it. And I like that you caught that I try to take it in a little more academic, a little more serious, a little deeper approach than the other sort of watered down, more tabloidy sites. Although I don't mind being a little tabloidy here and there, it gets readers,
Right.
So that's what happened. I started working on a master's thesis that was dealt with James Bond and Ian Fleming, and how Ian Fleming basically wrote into all the stories, all the novels, real world black operations and PSYOPs type stuff, because he was a high level naval PSYOPs officer, which most people don't know that. And then when you find that out about Ian Fleming, you say, oh, well, that actually makes a lot more sense with what's going on in the Bond novels, as well as the films too, I should add.
Right.
So I just thought that would be a great topic for graduate level research. And this is kind of trendy in academia now, because a lot of people don't read the academic papers that are produced. They just kind of go into a vault in the basement of your university, and they just sit there. So people are kind of gotten this trend of trying to be a little more relevant, culturally relevant. And we're just so saturated with pop culture that this is now kind of a norm in academia, where people are analyzing these kinds of things. And I wasn't averse to that. I thought it would be kind of cool. So I wanted to choose something that could tie in philosophy and psychological warfare and history, military operations, and fiction and pop culture. And what better to do than James Bond?
Yeah, I think the James Bond information is super interesting. The Ian Fleming stuff, the fact that he was a British naval PSYOPs officer. Right. I guess a question for you is, what would be some of his objectives in writing the Bond series? What does he get out of, not necessarily him, but what does the larger elite community get out of predictive programming and leaving these kinds of breadcrumbs?
Well, I think if you look at the time setting when he was beginning to do his work, this is at the close of World War II, and Fleming was involved in different operations like Operation Mincemeat and the operation that involved the Enigma machine with Alan Turing and all that, cracking that code. So Fleming was kind of floating around in the background, a lot of that stuff. And in certain operations, he was directly involved in planning and trying to lure, say, Rudolf Hess into Scotland through the use of Aleister Crowley. So that was Fleming was in the background with that. He was in the background with other staged situations in military operations where you would have a fake body laid out with disinformation plans laid in the jacket of the soldier for the Germans to find. So when the Germans found the soldier, they were then given disinformation. This was all hatched in Ian Fleming's mind, along with his other British PSYOP buddies. And many of the people in those sort of wealthy classed lesser nobility circles and nobility circles that Fleming was involved with were actually involved in pretty hardcore esoteric stuff, magic and so forth. So Maxwell Knight, for example, is a famous British intelligence agent. And some people think he's the basis for either Bond himself in part, or the character M in the novel, who's Bond's handler. But I think the reality is that after you read about 10 or 15 books on this subject, you start realizing that what Ian Fleming did was probably just combine, a whole bunch of characters into the person of Bond. So even perhaps older era British Renaissance spies factor into it, like John Dee, or even Ian Fleming himself factors into it, Maxwell Knight. All of these people sort of have a role in that. So on one level, excuse me, I was at a concert this weekend, so I'm kind of recuperating. You can hear that in my voice, but
no worries.
So on one level, it was NSYNC. I was at the NSYNC concert, dancing all weekend. Okay, not really, but so on one level, Fleming is writing fiction and he's having fun with it. It was initially just considered pulp dime store novel stuff, and then over time, the scholar Umberto Eco, who's a famous Italian semiotician and author, wrote a piece that sort of raised the status of, it's called Narrative Structure in Ian Fleming's Bond, I believe is the title of it. So he wrote that famous essay in the 60s, and that kind of catapulted Fleming into a little more literary a little more respected literary status than he previously had. Mm-hmm. So when that happened, they started, I think, realizing that, actually a lot could be done. Now, Hollywood and theater had for a long time been used for propaganda, psychological warfare, all the way back to things like Virgil's Aeneid. That was Roman state propaganda. But with the rise of modern advertising and the Bond stories are actually kind of instrumental in some of the earliest versions of product placement. Sean Connery had a famous interview that he gave at Playboy back in the 60s, where after he'd done a couple Bond films, he was saying, yeah, we're actually experimenting with placing vodka in the films. So shaken, not stirred. And that was associated with vodka. And then, so they started realizing that they could, promote, advertise. So another level of it is, of course, product placement.
Right.
The next level of it would be propaganda. So you could have what's called in the form of this in psyops could be something like projection, where what your side is doing, you would actually project onto the enemy, right? So the fictional organization of Spectre, Special Executive for Counterintelligence, SPECT, terrorism, revenge, and extortion. I had to think for a minute. That's what Spectre stands for. This actually comes from the first incarnation in Casino Royale, which is called SMERSH, which is a similar acronym. And SMERSH is actually Soviet intelligence. That was actually a real world Soviet intelligence operation. And you can read about that there's an article at my site that an excellent Russian translator named Nina did, and it's called Hitler's Plot to Assassinate Stalin. And you'll read about the real world basis for SMERSH there, Soviet military counterintelligence under Grigory Grigorenko. But so from SMERSH, though, after a little, it quickly turns into Spectre in the novels. And so what Spectre is this international criminal syndicate that is not bound by any national ties and basically recruits the best spies and assassins, and is pretty much just a private mafia type cartel, right. Secret society organization, right?
Sounds familiar.
Exactly. And so what's going on here is that pretty much since the British establishment, more or less, the Royal Society and so forth, who is Spectre? Well, then what would you do? Well, you would say that Russia is Spectre, right? And so you tack it onto some nation state. Well, Nazi Germany is Spectre, when it's actually the Royal Society, and that's the real Spectre. So that's called projection, right? So if you're engaged in biowarfare programs, vaccination programs, mass inoculation programs, depopulation, all these things that are projected onto villains like Blofeld, these are explicitly stated as plans by the Royal Society. So that's another level of it. Now, to what degree Fleming was actually cognizant of that, it's hard to parcel out. I've looked at the collection of Ian Fleming's personal library. He did have quite a few pretty deep state, esoteric, dark titles there, a handful of them. And he was very much connected to the establishment. He actually helped Bill Donovan set up the OSS. He was one of the British intelligence agents that helped the OSS come about in the U.S., our first so-called intelligence agency, with Bill Donovan. So you can see that he's very much a mover and shaker. He's palling around with Aristotle Onassis and different nobility. He comes from a prominent, wealthy banking family, the Valentine banking family. So Valentine Fleming, I should say, was a prominent banker as well as his granddad. So, he's not coming from the outskirts. He's not a low-level person who is just kind of working his way up. He's very much tied into the intelligence establishment of the globe and palling around with the elites.
Yeah.
So that would lead me to think that he probably had a really good insight into what was going on in the world. And so that's the propaganda element of it. The psyop element of it, in short, is the projection element of it. You put onto the enemy what you're actually doing. And I don't mean to oversimplify things. It's not like it's just a world of good guy, bad guy. But that's how it functions in propaganda.
Right. Yeah, it's a real curious thing to me. I guess another thing people sometimes say is that a purpose it serves is when something actually does happen, say vaccines, for example, when people are talking about a real world vaccine issue, someone will say, what are you talking about, man? That's just the plot from Kingsman. I guess it makes it easier for people to dismiss if they've seen it in a movie previously, as it's not possibly a real world thing. Is that an element?
It is. It's a conditioning element in terms of social engineering. And I believe that this is my thesis on that aspect of it, is that especially when you look at science fiction, if you look at somebody like Asimov, and so when he was sketching out the Foundation series back in the 40s, and it was published in like Amazing Stories or whatever, and then it became a novel soon after that. If you read the Foundation, what it discusses is this future galactic empire where everything is run on the basis of predictive algorithms. And so the main character, Hari Seldon, is a scientist who develops this algorithm that is somehow what it does is it looks at mass movements for a long time, and then based on pattern recognition projects into the future most likely scenarios. And so he can actually predict the downfalls of empires with it. Now, this is actually the Google Palantir type technology that we see revealed today by the NSA and these different tech giant corporations, Google, Apple, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so what's the use of this in terms of fiction and science fiction? Well, so if you could project what would be going on back in the 40s and 50s, like Asimov, and then decades later this comes to be, well, you've kind of almost prophesied in a way, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that like they literally were prophesying, like speaking to the Oracle at Delphi or something. Right. But what I'm saying is that it gives the impression to the public that, oh man, like they're the new gods, the new priest class. That's what I'm getting at. So what you do is you suppress the technology and the secrets that you've discovered in nature and the hidden tech and all that. You give everybody kind of a bogus, materialistic kind of philosophy. This is my view. And then as you release these tech secrets out into the world in a very controlled way, because we live under like a planned obsolescence system. It's not a free market cutting edge type system.
I agree with that.
You gradually leak out something that you probably discovered the basics for, 50 years ago. And then what that does is give you the impression of this godlike status. And that's actually revealed in the Foundation series. They actually reveal the secrets of technology under the guise of a religion. And Asimov makes that abundantly clear in the first novel. So that's a great example of that. And you can see that with H.G. Wells too, things to come, these different projections of the future that he had that seem to line up pretty accurately to where we're going. So yes, it's a conditioning, it's a psyop, it's propaganda, it's advertising. It gives you a godlike status because it looks like you're telling the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very multifaceted agenda. And so at this upcoming conference, I guess you're speaking on the theme of predictive programming, Hollywood, and the notion of a breakaway civilization. And on your blog, you wrote a piece about the James Bond movie Moonraker. Can you walk us through why Moonraker is a good example for this topic?
I can. It's ridiculous and it's campy. It's cheeseball. It's one of my least favorite Bond stories. Very different from the novel, but I still think we can come away from the movie with a good insight into what's really going on. Because that's kind of like some of these novels were written, like that was written in 1950. What was the year? I forget the year of Moonraker being written, 55. Okay, so this is written in 1955, and it's actually about the V2 rocket program in the novel. So this is Operation Paperclip. So there's Sir Hugo Drax in the novel is running this secret space program that's private. And under the guise of protecting London with a big ICBM, he's actually going to nuke London because he's in his heart of hearts, he's still a member of the SS, or he's a secret Nazi, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the novel plot, and that's more or less accurate in terms of what happened with the Operation Paperclip and the secret space program in terms of what the history of NASA and all that. So I'm sure everybody's got some general sense of that if you've ever been in the conspiracy world. But what's interesting about the film incarnation is that in 1979, kind of riding on the cusp of Star Wars and these, in 2001, these big sci-fi blockbusters that had emerged. I think the the directors and producers thought that it would be a good idea to try to put Bond in space. So spies in space, which, doesn't tend to work out very well. So it's a cheeseball movie, but yeah, I guess it had some pretty big special effects for the time. But even in some of these campy cheeseball things, we can actually find at times pretty deep revelations of, predictive programming or whatever terms you want to use. And so in this scenario, we have this secret space program that's actually run by a private guy, mega billionaire. We can think about Elon Musk. We can think about SpaceX, or these different real world incarnations that we see of this kind of thing now. And this is like a DARPA style space-based weapon system that is interlinked to the satellite system. So we can think of Skynet here. I've linked many times. I've got another piece called Skynet is Real. And it's the subtitle is Alchemists, Exemplarism, and Technosis. I cite some actual Pentagon documents about the plan for Skynet. Now, this is public. It's not hidden. You can find the documents at FAS.org, Federation of American Scientists, which is pretty much an academic open source database for these kinds of white papers. And so under the guise of the Cold War, you have the erection of this private space program, and that's what we see in Moonraker. And so the scenario is more or less that this secretive organization, it's always the same. Although it's not Spectre in Moonraker, it might as well be. It's just another private person, a secret shadow guy who's erecting and putting the money into this DARPA, Star Wars Defense Initiative style weaponization of space through the satellite systems. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately it's going to be interlinked globally, an Internet of Things scenario. And what's really fascinating, though, is actually based on what you see in the film, is that it's actually based on the real historical ideas of breakaway civilizations, right? So if we think about, for example, the Nazi perspective on Germanic peoples having a biological supremacist status, the Nazis were a kind of breakaway civilization. If we think about Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand is presenting another version of the breakaway civilization there, where John Galt's hidden away secret community of elites and true libertarians is, behind this holographic mountain out in Colorado while they let the rest of the world go to shit, right?
Yeah.
It's the same scenario here, right? So, and it's called in the film, Roger Moore says, well, it's Noah's Ark. So they're actually going to reseed the earth with, Hugo Drax wants to reseed the earth with his progeny. And that will make him kind of like a new Adam, a new God, a new creator. And so it's a new Genesis. And meanwhile, he's going to get rid of the rest of the population through aerosol spraying of a bioweapon.
Boom.
Yeah. So that's the secret that Bond discovers. Bond discovers that Drax Industries has a front corporation called Vinny Glass, and the glass company is actually manufacturing a bioweapon that will be sprayed on the planet. So there we have, you think about Bill Gates, right? You got aerosolized geoengineering, DNA manipulation, vaccinations, alteration of the genome, Monsanto, seed vaults, right? So this is kind of portrayed here in this 1979 Bond camp film, which is quite astonishing, I think, in my view. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty deep. And in your analysis, you say that the book is kind of phase 1 of Project Paperclip, and then the movie is kind of phase 2. And you mentioned that this phase 2 of the operation, the plugging in of Nazi scientists to the American machine, is responsible for the UFO Foo Fighters we see today. Do you think all of these exotic crafts are man-made?
I'm of the opinion that what happens is, so you have this idea that UFOs are like ancient visitors, or like the visitations of the gods or something like that. Now, I do think that it's possible that you can reverse engineer secret technology. I don't think that it comes directly from like the Space Brothers or something. What I think is that you have in the ancient rituals and myths that may have an origin in these gods. you can actually tease out technological secrets. So I do think there is some truth to that paleotechnology aspect. And that's why we see, as I've said many times in discussions, if you look at Plato's dialogues, how does Plato know what's going on at the atomic level? How does he know the structure of reality is actually Platonic solids, geometric forms? Mm-hmm. How does Socrates in the Phaedo know that there are colors outside of our color spectrum and that there are actually higher dimensions, which he actually says? Well, how does he know this now, given the fact that now there's electron microscopes that can look at the subatomic level, and this is what we see? So there had to be some source, some transmission of knowledge in that ancient time period that went beyond what we tend to consider as just simplistic, ancient, superstitious man, right?
Right.
And Plato says in the Timaeus that this comes from Egypt. It's the Egyptian tradition. So I'm of the opinion that that's the origin of some of these tech secrets. And when you start looking into hidden metaphysics, deep technology, that kind of stuff, there does seem to be a parallel to what you read in ancient myths. Mm-hmm. I don't have a perfect explanation for how that. I don't know how that is, but it looks to be the case.
Right.
But I don't think that what we see most of the time in modern pop culture and in terms of UFO experience and phenomena is like extraterrestrial beings. I tend to think that it's a terrestrial phenomena. It is largely a psyop. I do think there's an occult esoteric aspect to it. I do think it does apply to, at times, there's a possibility of the higher angelic entities being involved in this. Mm-hmm. But I don't generally accept like the ET style mythology of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I grew up enjoying that alien motif, but in later years, I do see several flaws with it along the way. But it is a curious thing. I like the idea that these technological secrets could come from some of these occult rituals of the elite, that might really be what's behind it, because we see technology and magic, they seem to connect pretty well, especially when you look at the things that NASA puts out or even CERN. They seem to have, callbacks to occult symbolism, and it's very strange because in the mainstream, we're kind of told that these are diametrically opposed views. They're either a foo-foo magic person or you're a hardcore scientist. So I think it's really funny that behind the scenes we see this interlocking, and I'm a big fan of that perspective that they might be communicating with something, some multidimensional entity, some type of spiritual entity that isn't necessarily a gray from Zeta Reticuli, but they're getting some type of information that is valuable for them. Otherwise, why would they waste their time with the rituals?
Bingo. You got it. That's exactly it. It's also possible that most people don't have any conception of this, but what if the scientific action or what you're enacting in a lab, what if it is itself a ritual?
That's true.
In other words, what if what's happening at CERN is a ritual? And if you look at CERN's website recently, they have this video of all these dancers putting on this performance.
Yes.
And there's they're all wearing the Masonic square and compass, right? So it is a ritual, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a bunch of pieces that treat this as well. And I think that's why you can go back to even people like John Dee. I have an essay I wrote called John Dee, Leibniz, John Dee, and Golems, or something to that effect. I wrote it a couple of years ago. But I go into some of John Dee's writings and I compare him to Leibniz's writings. And being roughly contemporary, they both projected on the basis of their philosophy that you could create. There's this the old Golem mythology, and that's what AI is, more or less. And Leibniz was able to figure out from what he could project based on his Platonic philosophy that you could create a mirror machine that worked on the principles of the human mind. So basically, you could create a computer, and that's why Leibniz would later go on to be instrumental in the formation of the computer. It's also worth mentioning that Newton was a big-time alchemist. And so what Newton did was he would actually read the ancient myths in an alchemical way. And he would do his experiments based on the mythological and alchemical recipes that he could find in the myths. And that's, most people don't know that, but that's 100% true. And last I read at least, all of Newton's alchemical writings are actually stored in Tel Aviv. So Newton is part of this kind of Royal Society secret esoteric metaphysical group. You look at Leibniz and what he was doing in Germany, and some of these Vienna Circle people kind of had the same thing going on there. So we can't look at science as what it's presented as either, because there's a lot more going on. But I like that you mentioned the ritual aspect of the sort of advanced and secret technology, because you can see this clearly if you go to CERN's website in terms of lectures. I have an article I wrote. It's the one that I titled "We Platonists Will Have the Victory," or it's titled "Energetic Ether Metaphysics." Both of those are worth reading, but one of the two I include Arthur Miller's lecture, and Arthur Miller is a scholar of Wolfgang Pauli, who was a famous quantum physicist of the 20th century, almost as big as Einstein. But Pauli was also into Platonism and the esoteric. He wrote a whole treatise on Johann Kepler and alchemy and Kepler. But Pauli said, just like Werner Heisenberg, that at the lowest level of reality, what we see is Platonic geometric forms. We see formal structure. At the lowest level, the fabric of reality is highly designed and organized. It's not random chaos like the Darwinians say. So there you have it. And Arthur Miller points out all this esoteric stuff. And so there you go right there. That's directly at CERN. And Arthur Miller has a famous book on Pauli. Adam Archetype is another good book on Pauli you can look at. Where the modern cutting edge science type guys are into this kind of stuff. Now, I'm also of the opinion that some of this quantum consciousness stuff is a lot of BS too. So you can't just go by this quantum consciousness stuff either, because sometimes that's disinformation and baloney as well. So the truth is always generally somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this kind of stuff. And I guess another element that kind of ties in is, to quote your blog, you say that you believe the celestial intelligences organize the synchronicities, the synchronicitous events and connections we experience under the power and guidance of God. And this is an interesting paradigm. Are you saying that when we experience synchronicities, that might be what's behind this? This is some type of maybe communication?
Yeah, I believe it's a script. I believe it's angelic script. And that actually goes back to the ancient Eastern notion, right? So the Hindu notion of what they call Sandhabhayasa was the idea that in modern philosophy, it's called semiotics. In ancient religious philosophy, it's that. And it's this idea that scripts can be written not just by humans in terms of, parchment paper or vellum or whatever, but if we're ruled by celestial intelligences, and this is the normative perspective, the normative metaphysical view of how the world's made up, the universe is made up, in the Middle Ages and ancient world. Well, the celestial intelligences are intelligences, right? So they're not just inert, immaterial, impersonal forces. They're actual intelligent beings, and they exist in kind of a graded hierarchy. What the Western religious tradition has called the celestial hierarchy, and you find that even in the Western Hermetic tradition as well as the Western theological tradition. So you can even look at somebody like Cornelius Agrippa and his 3 books of occult philosophy. He goes into great depth discussing the celestial hierarchy. So you would have angels, cherubim, seraphim, dominions, principalities, powers, and so forth. These are all sort of graded into 9 choirs of these beings. But there's also a corresponding fallen hierarchy from every one of these ranks as well. And that would, of course, make up the power forces that would be, Lucifer and Satan and so forth and all that. So I tend to think that those perspectives on how the world operates are much more accurate. And so you can get really, really deep and intensive into this kind of research, and you find out that actually certain numbers correspond with certain spirits and so forth, and these are old ideas, of course, but I think they're more accurate than what we're given as baloney science since Darwin and Newton. Ultimately, unfortunately, Newton has more bad ideas, I think, than good ideas in my view.
Yeah.
Leibniz is somebody much better in that time period. But I also tend to favor a lot of sort of the Eastern Orthodox theologians' perspectives on these as well. I think they have tremendous insights that most Western minds are not cued into, generally speaking. So if you read someone like Gregory of Nyssa, he has really, really in-depth, elaborate treatments of all this. He goes into the nature of infinity, really, really in-depth, which, most people were not even conceiving of that until modern mathematics with people like Jorg Cantor. But you can find precedents for that kind of thought all the way back to Gregory of Nyssa. But anyway, so you look at these Eastern theologians, and there's a famous book, Dionysios, and Dionysios has a treatise that's easily searchable. It's not that long, called The Celestial Hierarchy. And it's really good to get a perspective on this. And so if we want to look at the UFO alien type phenomena, I think it really fits into that matrix, that paradigm of understanding a lot better than in terms of the Darwinian ethos of, and this is generally the reason for why we're supposed to believe in aliens in terms of the, ET sense, is because we're told that, because the universe is, gazillions of years old, then that stands to reason that there would be life that evolved on other planets. And because it's gazillions of years old, those other planets would have beings with much more insight and wisdom than us. And so they would be able to fly here across the galaxy. But of course, they run out of gas or something and their ship crashes, which doesn't make much sense to me. Like if you can fly across the galaxy, but your ship crashes like a weather balloon or like something, like over in the desert, right? But
right. That's one of those issues.
But so a better paradigm, I believe, than that Darwinian ethos, and that's actually what the Royal Society has always promoted, is the idea of aliens and panspermia. A better perspective, I think, is the biblical account of the fallen hierarchy of angels and the Nephilim and the Watchers and all that, which I do think that's what Genesis 6 is talking about, if we're honest with that text.
Mm-hmm. So if we were to accept that synchronicities are angelic scripts, I mean, that's an interesting thought, but I guess from that paradigm, what should we glean? What insight should we get from synchronicities? Does that mean that we're on some type of proper path for our true will, or?
Well, I'll give you okay. That's a great question. Okay. So now I'm not saying this is like applicable to everyone, but for example, if you read the book of Daniel, in some of the texts, there's a Hebrew word that's used where the angel that comes to visit Daniel is in the Hebrew is called Palmoni, and that means in the Hebrew the wonderful numberer. So he's the angel who's in some way associated with numbers, times, calendars, and dates. Now, I'm not being John Hagee or Hal Lindsey here. I think that's all bullshit. Mm-hmm. But I do think that that's what the text of Daniel is talking about, and what Palmoni, what the angel tells to Daniel, the wonderful numberer, says that, I'm here to give you wisdom and insight on these topics. And so you're going to understand, and he tells Daniel, based on what you read in the other prophets, the patterns of what happens in history. Now, I believe that there are these kinds of patterns that emerge in history. And even secular, non-religious philosophers and historians have come to similar notions, like Oswald Spengler in Decline of the West, where he, in a kind of a Daniel type way, looks at history. And that's why, so Daniel, when he looks at the world empires, if you've read the book or if you recall it, he sees this big idol, and the idol has clay, stone, brass, gold that make it up. And these represent 4 successive world empires or civilizations. Mm-hmm. And so what Daniel's able to do is, because he's given wisdom, insight, and knowledge, he's actually able to read that sort of angelic pattern script in history. And that is how Daniel understands times, dates, and seasons, and is able to prophesy quite a bit. So that's what it is. So in other words, what the biblical historical account of the office of the prophet is the person who's able to understand those aspects through the wisdom that God grants. We see that as well with Ezekiel. There's a lot of similarities between Ezekiel, Daniel, and John's Apocalypse, for example, as well as the book of Zechariah. So these are all biblical prophetic texts that I think speak to this, to how it's possible that history And events can be scripted by angelic powers. And now how all that works, I don't know. I'm not some kind of expert. I'm not saying I'm a prophet either, but that would be my analysis of it. And I also think that, you can have, because there is a spiritual battle that's going on in the spiritual realm that's kind of mirrored on our level of reality in the material realm. You can have different powers engaging in different operations, right? So not all events are necessarily ordered by good powers. You can have wicked powers that perhaps are invoked or engaged in or interacted with in some way ritually or I don't know, whatever. That organize ritual events to set forth a kind of discharge into the psychosphere, so to speak.
Man, it's a deep and interesting thread for sure. To bring it back to movies a little bit, talk to us about Interstellar, because if there's going to be movies that allude to things going on in a secret space program, this would certainly have to be one of them, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's a more recent incarnation of this theme of the secret space program. So I think to start, Interstellar is Christopher Nolan's homage to 2001, right? So it's very much based on 2001, but he changes up where it goes a little bit. So it's not exactly like 2001. And it's also worth noting that I think Christopher Nolan films, as I've said many times, are important to pay attention to because Christopher Nolan films are full of predictive programming. So we've all, I think, in conspiracy world now could become familiar with the Batman Sandy Hook reference, right?
Right.
So, how that was put there, who put that there, it's hard to say. I understand that there was like a production company that was involved in producing the props and so forth. And so, to me, I would say that looks to be intentional. And given the fact that so much of what Nolan deals with in his films, all the way back even to Memento or Insomnia, is dealing with archetypes. And that's, Jungian. And so Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli had a long correspondence which is very much worth reading. If you get Carl Jung's book on synchronicity, if you read that, there's a whole chapter on their dialogue. And Pauli mentions it quite a bit as well as Arthur Miller in his lecture that I referenced earlier. So if we look at Interstellar, what you have here is a secret space program that's having to cope with whatever the blight is that's messing up Earth's crops. And we're never certain if this was a result of actual human experimentation, chemtrailing, or what. It's not exactly clear, but Earth is not going to be inhabitable for whatever reason. Maybe the crops were all GMO'd, right? Monsanto got the upper hand or something, right? And so we have this curious statement early on that now what I thought was neat that no one else seemed to cue into in the other reviews I read of it. I'm not bragging. I just didn't see anybody else pick up on this, but there's that curious scene at the beginning of the drone where the drone's flying around and Murphy says, "Hey, Dad, let's follow it." And Matthew McConaughey's running around and they follow it through this field and stuff. And
right.
It's almost like they treat it like it's this wounded animal or something, right? So it's
yeah.
They're like coaxing it and petting it and the poor drone. And so, but these events are organized, right? So these things that start happening on the farm that Matthew McConaughey's character is undergoing, Cooper, he starts realizing that there's patterns to these things. And so it's like it's an AI sort of intentional leading him down this road that leads him to where NASA is actually not defunct, because the textbooks they say in the story are that the moon landings are fake.
I love that element.
Yeah, and that there's no more NASA because we can't go to space. It's pointless. So we got to figure out how to fix the blight here on Earth. So things kind of revert to this agrarian society, right? So you're back to like 1950s America or 40s or something, right? So where most people are farmers and it's Midwestern or whatever. And so the moon landings are fake. They did it on a soundstage, but Cooper is led down this path of what all are kind of synchronicities, right? So it's as if the synchronicities are kind of organized by whatever this higher AI power is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he comes to find that there's a secret NASA, and they're going to need to send him, to space and figure out what to do. We're not going to have any oxygen anymore. And Matthew McConaughey says he's going to fly his Lincoln into space. So I can't do a discussion of this without my Matthew McConaughey impersonation. So.
Yeah, that's not bad.
So I'm sure most people have seen this film by now that are listening. And what I think is really neat about it is that what you have is the reversal of 2001, where HAL 9000 is kind of battling with Bowman, and then Bowman beats HAL 9000, and then he goes into into the beyond, into the infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens here is that Cooper goes into the Tesseract, which is the next dimension, with the aid of AI. So it's that little monolith-looking TARS, TARS, that travels with him into the dimension that's higher up.
Mm-hmm.
And what's neat is that from Platonism, from mathematics, and from even professors like Lisa Randall or Brian Greene and these different physicists, they actually talk about how it's demonstrably mathematically provable that there are these higher dimensions like this. You can find an old clip of Carl Sagan outlining this on YouTube. Just type in Carl Sagan fourth dimension or something like that, higher dimensions, and you'll get this clip. It's been viewed by millions of people. And, he's laying out how there is these higher dimensions. And in geometry, it's called a tesseract. If you ever read the novel when you were a kid, Wrinkle in Time is about a tesseract.
Mm-hmm.
So these are real things, I think. And so that's being revealed to us in this novel, in this film. And when he goes through to the other side, you basically find out that the apotheosis of man, the deification of man, is sort of this cooperative operation between humans and AI. And so we learned that that's actually who was guiding Cooper along, was actually future Cooper and humans or whoever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like man maybe melding into AI, and then that's the source of how we go beyond the 4 dimensions or 3 dimensions that we inhabit presently, right? So it's all about the transcending of limitations, and the main limitations that humans can't transcend are time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the film is all about the transcending of time and space, and that's what happens in the Tesseract when he's in the next dimension, and he's able to speak through. It's not time bound, it's not spatially bound, but actually through imagery and symbols.
Right.
So he can kind of speak in binary, or he can speak through books on our shelf, and these different it's almost like he's in the astral realm where he can speak at the speed of thought, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he does with Jessica Chastain. So I rewatched 2001, right? So, and by the way, I think that's ultimately what the secret space program is all about. It's all about this advanced tech and transhumanism is the real secret, right? So I was thinking about this, and then I went back and I watched 2001, and I wrote a whole brand new big ass analysis of that one. And I started realizing, you know what? At the end of 2001, when Bowman is fighting with Hal, when he shuts Hal down, that's what triggers the message to come on the screen that Bowman is actually on a secret space mission to go beyond and to follow the monolith, right? So it's almost like the monolith engineered that situation to lead Bowman to the next level.
Yeah, you
right?
can say that.
And I had never thought about it that way. I just always kind of thought about it like, oh, you got to beat the AI, and then it's, man wins out, and, man becomes Star Child or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like it's actually engineered, perhaps. I don't know. It's just an interesting thesis I took on it. So I kind of went back and thought, well, actually, maybe 2001 and Interstellar kind of have the same message, because the monolith, if you look at the picture of Hal, where he's just a red dot,
yeah,
he's like a black screen with a red dot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he actually kind of favors the monolith. And in Interstellar, the monoliths, they are the AI that are walking around with everybody, and they're monoliths, right? And so when you go back and you watch 2001, I read a book about Kubrick recently before I wrote this, and the monolith was actually supposed to be a screen. It was actually kind of supposed to be this advanced sort of AI. So it's almost like maybe the AI gods or God, right? It's like what's directing all of this, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what's leading man, kind of out of this matrix, or however you want to conceive of it. So that was my take on it.
Yeah, man, I really love the movie Interstellar, but for a movie that already parallels 2001 in a lot of different ways, I did not like the choice of the AI, the Taurus, being the same exact shape as the monolith. I thought that it was a impractical choice for the machines to get around. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, did you find a deeper meaning in that exact replication? Because it seems too obvious for a guy.
Right.
Go ahead.
I think that. And I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm rambling a lot, but
no worries.
I thought that you're supposed to get the impression that like the NASA that's underground or whatever, like that's an older version, like the TARS and whatever the accompanying model are older. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of experimental AI that maybe we might have now in reality or something, but they're still kind of slugging around NASA. And I think it's even mentioned that they're kind of having to work with what they have. Right, like they don't know for sure if what they've got in the narrative, can actually accomplish what they need Cooper to go do. So I think the choice was, on the one hand, to make it obvious that it's a monolith, and rather than my initial reading of 2001, where man versus AI, I think Nolan wants it to be that AI is what will take us to the next level. It's what will help us. And it doesn't have to be a thing where we have to worry about, Skynet and Terminator coming alive and whatever, like killing us or something. That it can be a positive thing. And I agree with that. It actually can be a positive thing. It doesn't have to be some negative thing. It's a question of what humans choose to do with it, just like a weapon, right? I mean, a weapon can be a good thing for self-defense, or it can be something that you can kill people with. So,
right.
Commit murder. So in the same way, AI can be either a positive or a negative thing. It just depends on what humans choose to do with it. But that's what I saw it as. But like I said, when I went back and watched 2001, I kind of started thinking like maybe the monolith is actually is what Nolan is saying. Maybe it actually is like this AI thing, because in the original script that Kubrick and Clark wrote, the monolith has screens on it that are playing images that the apes watch. And if you remember at the end of Interstellar, the little boxes and monoliths that are walking around have screens on them.
Yeah. Huh.
That was actually what the monolith was supposed to be in 2001, but they decided not to do it because it would be too limiting. They didn't want people thinking like, oh, so the space gods are just TVs that fly around.
Yeah. And you talk about how intuition and love from humans, as well as the scientific thinking of the advanced AI, are both needed to complete the mission of transcending death in the movie Interstellar. I think that's a fascinating analysis. And now we're talking about 2001 being more of a cooperation between man and machine rather than a versus man and machine analysis. So I guess I'm curious, ultimately, is Interstellar a film meant to promote sympathetic feelings towards transhumanism and acceptance of a man-machine merger?
I think so. I really do. Because I think that's what, I think Nolan's point is, well, we're supposed to not have a space program anymore. And Obama supposedly defunded that a couple of years ago, which is all not true. That's NASA's always been a kind of a Hollywood front piece anyway.
Yeah.
But there has always been a real space program, and that's things like DARPA and Star Wars Defense Initiative and the weaponization of space and the satellite programs and satellite internet and all that. The eyes in the sky, that's the real space program. And to what degree the advanced Foo Fighter hovering, floating discs and stealth bombers or whatever are advanced. I'm sure they're mega advanced, and we just aren't told about it. And so what that means, I'm not sure. How far have we gone in the galaxy? I don't know. Have we gone past the Van Allen belt? I don't know. But what I think we're just intentionally not being told any of that stuff for sure. And we're told a whole bunch of baloney. So on one level, Nolan is looking at kind of what the pop mind thinks about science and, space travel is pointless or whatever. I'm of the opinion, kind of like some of the Eastern Fathers said, that humans are actually made to sort of expand and colonize and terraform the universe. So that's my view. I think that we will do that. Mm-hmm. I think that it is meant to be done. And I think Nolan's saying, look, we can do this. AI doesn't have to be this, like I said, Terminator thing that comes alive and kills everybody. I think that there are eugenicists and people who do want to use AI for that purpose explicitly.
Right.
And I'm of the opinion, too, that computers are never going to be alive. And I have philosophical reasons why I believe that. But so I don't think that AI is ever going to be sentient. And all they do is just sort of redefine what it means to be sentient to where anything that's operating is sentient. So if I record myself on a computer, the transhumanists will say, oh, that's you, right? No, that's not me. That's a simulation of me. But anyway.
Right. That makes sense.
So, that's just my view. But I think Nolan is saying we can't be completely scientific and rationalist. We got to have the human factor, and love is real. That was a big part of what Interstellar was about, was love.
Right.
And, the missing male with Cooper kind of being like Odysseus, where he's gone, and the masculine figure is no longer there. So that forces Jessica Chastain to kind of take on this masculine role. And she's, angry for a long time because her dad's gone, all mirroring Odysseus's journey and then his return. So, I think Nolan is kind of saying, look, we know transhumanism's coming and the AI is coming. So let's try to do positive with this and not let it be a negative thing where we have to worry that HAL 9000 is going to, nuke us all or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And to talk about NASA a little bit, so much of what we know, of course, when it comes to space comes from NASA, and also the Hollywood industry and sci-fi movies definitely shape our view of what space is like. And it's just, I'm having a real problem lately with my audience because some guests, if they cite NASA for anything, if they have any theories that branch off of NASA data, it's like the audience just dismisses them outright because, like you said, it's been a Hollywood PR front piece. But I guess the question is to what extent? Because now people, the flat earth is getting a resurgence. And there are people who write me that they don't even think that the planets are really out there because the only ones who are really viewing them are NASA. And it gets really crazy. I mean, where do we draw the line between what is really out in space and what has been shown to us through, a bunch of illusions?
Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, there's not simple answers to any of these questions. And so I have a friend, a good buddy of mine for a long time. He's an aerospace engineer. He contracted with NASA for a while. So NASA does do some real stuff, right? So that it's not completely fake.
Right.
They do shoot real rockets and all that. Now, beyond that, it's very hard to say exactly what's going on because just my opinion, when I see these Mars images, and NASA's been doing this forever, they've been saying, oh, we found water on Mars, found life on Mars, and it's always just a CGI image, right?
Yes.
So where's the real thing? Why don't you just show us a good HD picture of it, instead of these dumb, Max Headroom looking like 1989 CGI pictures?
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I know there is a secret space program. I know for a fact there is. They talk about the black budget for it. I know the Star Wars Defense Initiative was launched at Bohemian Grove. I know, Operation Paperclip was real and all that. Werner von Braun was real. They were, designing rockets and shooting them and so forth. But now then when you get into these deeper physics questions and metaphysics questions, it's very, very difficult to parcel out the true from the false. So, at the same time, you got disinformation and psyops going on with the reality questioning aspects of what we're being presented with in alternative media. In other words, it can go so extreme that people are wanting you to like question everything, right? So like nothing is real, you know?
Yeah.
And what that does is lead you right into the philosophical view of solipsism. So, well, then everything's just like a projection of my mind, right? So there have been philosophers who've espoused this and played with it. Descartes plays with this notion in his Meditations. And that quickly leads to absurdity because, as I've said many times, you can just deconstruct this philosophically and show that it's nonsense by saying, well, if everything is illusory and fake, then my discovery that everything is illusory and fake is also fake. Right. So then that's contradictory and self-refuting. So I don't think that's a road we want to go down. We can have in philosophy, what's called general reliability of our sense perceptions. So empirical data is vital. That doesn't mean that I'm an empiricist. I write quite a bit against empiricism, but empirical data, absolutely. It's very crucial, very important. Do as much investigation and firsthand, inspection as you can. But I don't know. There are all kinds of anomalies about physics that don't line up to the classic physics that we're told from Newtonian era and from materialistic, naturalistic Darwinism down that just do not make sense. Mm-hmm. Does that mean I think that flat Earth is correct? No, I don't. Something about that's not sitting right. But I do think there are things that they're pointing out about physics and metaphysics that don't make sense with what we're told in orthodox academia, so-called.
Right. I'm right there with you. That's the same value I get out of listening to that camp is all the holes they poke in the official stories. I'm like, yeah, I'm right there with you. I just don't come to the same conclusion. But something else I wanted to ask you about, we're getting down to the wire, but I do see you commenting on the state of alternative thinkers and the conspiracy community occasionally and the themes that come and go in these circles. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the alternative community, what are some of the major themes or views that you take issue with? Where are shows like this one missing the mark at times?
Well, I tend to take a pretty relaxed approach to letting people do what they want and have the guests on that they want to talk about. And I do that because I don't have too strict of a policy about what shows I go on. So if somebody will have me on and let me state my views, I'll go on their show. I don't care. But I'll also, make clear if I disagree about something. But as an alternative media as a whole is kind of a circus. It tends to mirror the mainstream media in many ways. So you'll see stories going around quite consistently that are fake, that are bullshit, that just get repeated in the mainstream media because they're in they get repeated in alternative media because they're in the mainstream media. So the mainstream media reports on ISIS compounds in Mexico and ISIS crossing the border. And then the alternative media just mirrors these. But at the same time, we're told that ISIS is not real in the alternative media.
Yeah.
Well, these two things can't be true. They're not the same. They're different claims, right? So there's no ISIS crossing the border. That's complete bullshit. But you'll see this mirrored all through alternative media. You'll see certain sites talk about, and it's the same crap that was on other sites 10 years ago, back in 2005, that Al Qaeda was crossing the Mexican border with nukes. Complete bullshit. Not true. Nukes are being stolen everywhere and they're running around loose. That's bullshit. Not true. So there's basically alternative media is just about as much bullshit as the mainstream media. So, it's hard to find really, really good, solid podcasts and shows out there. That's not anything about you or any particular group. I'm just giving my overall assessment. So I just do my own thing. I just don't even worry about it. I don't care who's doing what in alternative media. It's tends to be a circus, and I just go about my business.
Right. That's fair. I always like to ask when I have a guest that I think will talk about the conspiracy community broadly, because it is tough. I mean, I try to avoid the pitfalls. I try to avoid the disinformation, but again, so much is unverifiable. Yeah. You're kind of left with just your own general discernment. And I'm sure I've had guests on that had an agenda that I wasn't aware of and pushed a position that maybe served some higher purpose in the grand conspiracy. But
I'm sure I have too. Yeah.
Right. Sure. It's just, we do what we can, but it is fun to talk about and analyze the community we're in.
I agree. I think it's, my approach is, do your own thing and don't worry about it and go about your business and, state what you think and research as best you can. Use your critical thinking. Don't be duped into bullshit.
Right on, man. Cheers to that. And that just about does it for us. I mean, I very much enjoyed having you here, man. So many things we could have talked about. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. But
anytime.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Before we go, would you like to remind people where they can read your work and catch you live coming up at the end of the month?
Yes. You can go to jaysanalysis.com. I think I have there's 700 posts. About 600 of them are my articles. About 100 of them are the film reviews. So all kinds of stuff there. I will be speaking at the the Secret Space Program conference, and my lecture will be Predictive Programming and the Secret Space Agenda. That's October 31st to November 1st in Bastrop, Texas /Austin, that area. If you want to help me out, then if you buy some tickets, put in the code SSP Dyer 2015, and that'll give you a discount. That's also how I get paid for the people that use my code. And I would also like to mention that my subscriber site offers philosophy lectures that touch on all the kinds of topics that we mentioned today, but they tend to be a little more academic. So if you're interested in learning philosophy, getting into the primary texts of Plato and Aristotle and different historical pieces, that's what I offer to subscribers for $4.95 a month, and you get those once a week. And there's an archive you can access as well, with a bunch of interviews too. So it's not just boring philosophy talks. It's exciting, sexy philosophy talks. And I would also like to mention I have an upcoming show with Natural News they're starting a radio program. And so my show will be Esoteric Hollywood, and that'll be premiering next week as well.
Awesome. Very cool, man. Well, thanks again. I did have a blast. Take care of yourself out there and have a great time in Austin. Well, there it is. Another show in the bag. I thought Jay made a great guest. I really like going into cinema symbolism, and I think this branched off into a bunch of interesting areas. Angelic script and the nature of synchronicities, links between magic and technology. Those things are right up my alley for sure. I liked how product placement came up early on. It's funny how we're seeing a mainstream splash of stories about ISIS using Toyota trucks. Ale Demengard, he mentioned that months ago. It's like Toyota didn't get enough out of it, and Russia came in to end ISIS so quickly they throw out a news media blitz about stories detailing this connection, and they all did the rounds. No real information given or conclusion drawn, just ISIS used Toyota trucks. And if you listen to any mainstream news in the past couple of weeks, I think you've probably heard that. I guess critics would say that that's bad press, but nobody is linking Toyota to terrorism in their mind. It's just about brand repetition over and over, and they know how it works. I wasn't sure then if there was something going on, but once all the big shows took that story, that's handed down from on high, and it's just a funny thing. So it was a pretty good first hour, but if you're a member of THC Plus and you listened to that second hour, we got into the new movie The Martian, as well as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Wag the Dog, True Detective, Mad Max, and Jurassic World. So many movies we didn't even touch American Ultra, because that's just too obvious. We talked about Saturnian symbolism, mind control, sex cults, the idea that a lot of pop stars could be victims of this abuse. We talked about filmmakers who might have revealed too much, ritual murders involving Hollywood, and the idea that some of these celebrity deaths and other high-profile deaths could be staged or done with the use of a double so that some of these people could fake their own deaths and then retire somewhere. And we talked about the intensive work Jay has done breaking down the cult of scientism and how that affects the culture, as well as Tesla and some of the reasons why he was a badass. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it action-packed. Please make sure to check out jaysanalysis.com to dig into all his stuff. And if you're going to be going to the Secret Space Program Conference in Austin, you can see him there. Next week is the return of one of my favorite guests and another guest from the conference. Maybe I'll keep it a surprise, but I will give you the hint of saying the phrase cosmic war. I'm sure a lot of you know what that means. So keep doing what you do, people. Enjoy the day. Make some progress towards those goals. Buck the system. Break free from the chains. Watch out for the temple guards. Tell your boss to shove it and start playing to win. I'm Greg Carlwood, and I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed. Your move, sorcerers of Hollywood. Your frickin' move.
I put a spell on you because can't stand. No putting me down. Spell on you. Because you're mine. The high side spell on you. You're not afraid to do the time.
Look, people, we're well aware there isn't a shortage of podcasts in the world, but the Higher Side Chats is something special. And if you enjoyed the first action-packed power hour of speculation and education in today's show, know that you can listen to a second hour by becoming a member of THC+. For $5, you'll get 5 uninterrupted 2-hour episodes a month, a members forum, occasional bonus content, free downloads of THC's closing music, a private RSS feed, and the extra time in your day that wasn't wasted listening to unrelated ads. It's probably less than the tip for your last meal, and it's the collective power of small contributions that ensures the Carlwood can dedicate the necessary time to making great shows and provide the finely tuned first hour for everyone else. So just sign up at thehighersidechatsplus.com, read through the frequently asked questions page for information on the best ways to listen on your devices, and enjoy the ride. And since our humble host never wastes your time reading copy for NatureBox or Audacity, maybe you have an extra minute to share the show, review us on iTunes, follow THC on Facebook and Twitter, or help with any of the other half a dozen annoying things that must be done for a podcast to stay on top in this dog-eat-dog world.